Chapter 121. It's a pity that it fell through. After tonight, the upper floors of Cloud Smoke Pavilion never displayed melon seeds and snacks again on the other side. As soon as Li Hao left Cloud Smoke Pavilion, he bumped into Fu, seeing Fu rushing over in a hurry. With an expression of slight tension on his face, Li Hao raised an eyebrow. "Young master, thank goodness. You didn't do anything in there, did you?" Li Hao quickly checked Li Hao's clothing. Li Hao couldn't help but speak wordlessly, saying, "Fu, how old do you think I am? Besides, I have a fiancé. I was only here to join in the fun with these guys, to help them relax. Constantly practicing martial arts is quite miserable." Hearing Li Hao say this, Li Fu immediately felt relieved and, while he still somewhat trusted Li Hao, he said with a bitter smile, "Young master, you should hurry back with me. The Marquis is quite angry right now." "Angry?" Li Hao was slightly stunned, frowning. He immediately returned with Li Fu. As for the disciples inside the building, they were no longer children. They could make their way back on their own without his care. Before long, Li Hao followed Li Fu back to the mountain and river courtyard. Inside the courtyard, Li Tiangang sat commandingly in the main hall, a new desk beside him. Aside from a teacup, there was also a rattan stick on it. Li Hao and Li Fu saw this as soon as they came in. Li Fu's face changed immediately, and he hurriedly said, "My lord, the young master has returned. And there are reasons for this matter, is that so? I would like to hear it." Li Tiangang's face was overcast with anger, but remembering the incident with the scroll last time, he spoke in a heavy tone. Li Hao's brow knit slightly. Li Fu quickly recounted the whole story. "Nonsense. If someone made a wish for you to give them a piece of land, would you agree to it as well?" After listening, Li Tiangang grew even angrier, feeling that Li Hao's nature was indeed too wild. Casually speaking of making promises like this, what's said must be done. Otherwise, it is to break faith with others. Li Hao said, "This is to motivate them, and it's conditional within the realm of what I can handle. You could afford to give away a city too if you become a true dragon, couldn't you?" Li Tiangang looked at him and said. Li Hao met his gaze, and after holding it for a moment, he couldn't help but sigh and said, "What I can handle is a relative term, very broad, and I think that I'm the one to judge its extent. If the demand is too excessive, I naturally won't agree." Li Tiangang raised an eyebrow and said, "You still know to leave some leeway, but have you considered the consequences of visiting a brothel today?" Li Hao said, "If I remember correctly, my second uncle said that you all visited quite a few in your youth, so why can't I? Do you think you can compare with us?" Li Tiangang couldn't help but inwardly scold his second uncle, wondering how he could carelessly chat about the elder's past with a child. Just as he was about to scold Li Hao, seeing the cold look in Li Hao's eyes, he was slightly taken aback, his expression subtly changing. He looked at Li Hao for a moment and let out a long sigh, saying, "How ere times change, I've received news that the infinite Buddha Lord has recalled your cousin. At this juncture, to act in such a way suggests you're certainly prepared to clash with him in the struggle for the true dragon position." He continued, "They are aware of your situation and still made this choice. They must be fully prepared. You can't afford any negligence at this time." Li Hao fell silent for a moment, then nodded and said, "I understand." Li Tiangang looked at him for a while, wanting to say something, but ultimately held back and said, "During this time, you should refrain from wandering about, although I've promised that you can do as you wish and I would compensate you. You should at least stay put for this period." "Stay put?" Li Hao glanced at him, silently sighed to himself. When had he ever not behaved? Hadn't he always stayed in the residence over these years? Was visiting a brothel really being so unruly? He felt somewhat helpless. Once prejudices are formed, they seem hard to change. Yet it was somewhat ironic and lamentable that such prejudices would emerge among those with the closest blood ties. Having lost the interest to say more, he turned and left. This child, when will he rein in his nature? I wonder who he takes after. As he watched Li Hao depart, Li Tiangang heaved a sigh, feeling greatly fatigued. He wanted to make amends to Li Hao, but didn't want Li Hao to go down the wrong path. "Master, after all, you've just returned. Perhaps it's best not to rush things too much," Zhao said with a worried expression. He always felt that there might be big problems arising between this father and son. Their personalities were truly worlds apart. Chapter 122. Time flies. Since returning from the brothel, Li Hao had been kept in the family mansion by Li Tiangang, not allowed to wander off. Because of this, father and son had a small argument once, but in the end, they both compromised. Li Hao agreed to stay in the family mansion, but what he did there was no longer subject to interference. Li Tiangang agreed. Li Hao no longer spent his days painting, but apart from going to play chess with the fifth elder, He spent the rest of his time in the listening rain tower. He was waiting for his second uncle to return, and in the meantime he was browsing through these cultivation techniques. There were so many books in the listening rain tower that it would take at least 10 years of non-stop reading to get through them all, let alone comprehend them. Initially, Li Hao had picked some high-level cultivation techniques to practice, not paying much attention to the basic ones, but this time he started from the basics with his sixth stage. Inside of the physical body path, he should have been able to step into the heavenly human realm, yet he was stuck here. Li Hao planned to first understand the heart of a grandmaster. However, easier said than done, it was difficult in practice. What is a grandmaster? It means someone who can start their own school and have their own way. No one could teach a grandmaster how to act, nor could anyone give advice to a grandmaster. Not even the three immortals could do it because each grandmaster's path is different. Although the immortals' realms are higher, they can only pass on some of their own experiences in promotion and cultivation and cannot specifically point out what to do. Similarly, reaching the celestial master realm, one must find their own way forward step by step, with no cultivation techniques to guide, no one to teach. One can only learn by referencing, contemplating, and understanding for oneself. My own path in martial arts. Li Hao sat in the listening rain tower with a book on the fundamentals of martial arts in hand, his eyes flickering. He had asked his second uncle how to comprehend the heart of a grandmaster. The second uncle gave him 3 ways. One was to gain worldly experience and find one's martial heart through the trials and tribulations of life. The second was to teeter on the brink of life and death, and in the face of great terror, to stimulate a moment of enlightenment and thereby set foot into that realm. The third way was steadier and depended on personal comprehension, to seek from the most basic martial arts techniques. Why the most basic techniques? Because the higher and more profound a technique, the easier it is to be blinded by the intricacies and miss the core essence. It's like a stone tossed to the ground. Everyone knows it to be a stone, despised by thousands, casually trampled upon. But if it's placed on a table, especially in a shrine, it's cherished by the world, worshipped and revered by thousands. Yet in essence, it is still just a stone. At the moment, Li Hao was browsing the overall compendium of martial arts, which contained many disciplines, but it was only a simple list: swords, spears, staffs, fists, movement techniques. Li Hao flipped through the pages casually, not forcing himself to gain any particular insight, simply passing the time as if out of boredom. A month went by in the blink of an eye. Li Hao read quite a few books in the listening rain tower, covering not only martial arts but also quirky tales of interesting people. Many books also recorded the life stories of numerous grandmasters. These grandmasters followed all sorts of bizarre paths with different martial arts styles. Some belonged to the sly school, where every move was underhanded, poking eyes out, attacking the groin, throwing poison, flinging sand and the like. The more ruthless the better. They condensed these types of moves into a set of techniques, their cultivation technique, and established schools with them. Others belonged to the tough fighting style, who were stubborn and fought head-on, never resorting to trickery, with every move explosive. Still others focused on movement techniques, emphasizing light and agile movement. For Li Hao, creating his own cultivation techniques wasn't hard. With his 6th-stage insight into swordsmanship and fist techniques, it was easy for him to invent his own styles of swordplay and boxing. He could even blend the 2 kinds of techniques. However, though the techniques were there, the heart was not yet formed. Most people who enter the Grandmaster realm do so by first establishing their will, and then according to the direction of their Grandmaster heart, they strengthen their own cultivation techniques. But Li Hao did it the other way around. Where's my heart? Li Hao murmured to himself. He had seen too many cultivation techniques, and now, it seemed to dazzle and confuse him. His heart was unsettled on this day. Li Hao came to the listening rain tower as usual, but soon after, sitting down, he was called back to the mountain and river courtyard, told that there was something they needed him for. When Li Hao returned to the courtyard, he was immediately greeted by the sight of his father, Li Tiangang, seated in the main hall, and facing him, the figure of a young girl. The girl was talking with his father, her back turned to the entrance. She was dressed in a dark purple robe, exuding an air of mystery, like a fragrant and intense orchid in bloom. Even just her upright back seemed to radiate with the vibrancy of youth. At that moment, they seemed to be discussing something that brought smiles to Li Tiangang's face. His gaze was filled with warmth and affection. Reaching the doorway, Li Hao thought of the etiquette he had been forced to learn over the past month, and instead of entering directly, he stopped and called out from outside. Li Tiangang looked toward Li Hao, and, at the same time, the girl with her back to the entrance turned around. Her brows were like distant mountains, her eyes as clear as bright streams. and her delicate face was softly illuminated. Her skin white as jade. Li Hao stared for a moment before his eyes widened in surprise. Schwer. Brother Hao, the girl recognized Li Hao as well, the past memories rising in her mind. She broke into a radiant smile and called out to him with a crisp voice. Li Hao finally confirmed that the girl before him was the little miss he hadn't seen for 8 years, the little tail that used to follow him around. He stepped forward quickly, looking her up and down with astonishment. In the 8 years they had not seen each other, the little girl who used to cry at the smallest thing had grown into a young lady, and not only that, she was beautiful and delicate, as though crafted with care. "You've grown up so much," Li Hao couldn't help but utter a remark full of amazement. The girl was indeed Bien Rushua. She stood up from her chair with graceful movements and smiled. "Brother Hao, you've grown a lot taller too, of course." Li Hao laughed and said, "Why didn't you say something before coming back? Have you eaten yet? Let me tell you, my cooking skills have improved a lot. In a few months, I can fatten you up into a little fatty." Bien Rukshu's cheeks flushed slightly as she said, "Brother Hao still likes to joke around. Who told you to be such a crybaby? I definitely have to tease you. I'm not a puppy." Li Hao laughed heartily, then asked, "How is it going with your swordsmanship training over there? Did anyone bully you?" Bien Rushua smiled and shook her head. "Master and my senior brothers and sisters are very nice to me. Nobody bullies me. That's good. And what about you, Brother Hao? Have you been well these years?" Bien Rushua asked, her eyes intently gazing at Li Hao. Li Hao grinned and said, "Of course, I've been great. Don't you know who I am? I am the one who bullies others. Nobody can bully me. My days are filled with eating and drinking, incredibly joyful." Li Tiangang listened and frowned slightly, sighing softly to himself. Bien Rushua glanced at Li Hao and said softly, "Brother Hao, stop joking around." Upon hearing this, Li Tiangang's face turned stern as he said, "However, be serious. Schwer has just come back. You're not allowed to bully her." All right. Li Hao smiled helplessly. Bien Rushua immediately turned to Li Tiangang and said, "Uncle, Brother Hao never bullies me." Li Tiangang looked at her, a smile appearing on his face. "Schwer, you're just too soft-hearted. Don't worry, now that I'm back, if However dares to bully you, just come to me and I'll stand up for you. When your father entrusted you to me, I promised to take good care of you. I will never let you suffer any grievances in our Li family." "Thank you, Uncle." Bien Rushua smiled and bowed slightly in thanks. Then she looked at Li Hao in front of her and noticed that the smile on his face seemed suddenly less bright. She didn't think much of it and said to Li Tiangang, "Uncle, I'd like to go for a walk with Brother Hao and have a chat alone." "Go ahead, you two," Li Tiangang said with a nod and a smile. Bien Rushua bowed slightly again, then said to Li Hao, "Brother Hao, shall we go? I haven't been back in a long time. Would you accompany me for a walk outside?" Li Hao nodded, then, as if thinking of something, turned to look at his father who was seated higher up. "I'll take Schwer out for a walk." Li Tiangang nodded and said, "With Schwer by your side, I am at ease. Spend some good time with her in the upcoming days." The corners of Li Hao's mouth twitched slightly, then he turned and took hold of Bien Rukshu's hand, saying, "Let's go, I'll show you around the city. There's not a single delicious spot in Chizhou City that I don't know about." Her tender wrist that was grabbed gave a slight struggle as if startled, but quickly relaxed, allowing Li Hao to lead her. After watching them leave, Li Tiangang sighed softly. "However has been living a rather good life despite not having us around these years. It's a pity no one has been disciplining him. He's become too wild." Zhao opened his mouth slightly but then closed it again without saying anything. Li Tiangang's gaze softened. Fortunately, Schwer is well-mannered and sensible. Having her by his side can somewhat restrain him. "I feel more at ease now. That boy is fortunate to have Schwer in his life." Once they left the Divine General Mansion, Li Hao took the girl beside him and headed straight for the bustling district nearby. "Brother Hao, I just found out that Uncle only returned recently." Bien Rushua let Li Hao lead her without struggling, only her cheeks blushing while she glanced from time to time at the side of Li Hao's face. "After I left, were you all alone?" Li Hao smiled and said, "Silly girl, still as naive as when you were a kid. The mountain and river courtyard is so large, and with so many house servants and maids, how could I be alone? House servants and maids are different. Brother Hao would never confide his inner thoughts to them." Bien Rushua said, "Then let's not talk about it," Li Hao said with a laugh. Bien Rushua paused, then asked, "Will it be uncomfortable not to talk?" Amused to it, Li Hao brought Bien Rushua to a sugar painting stall. "Want some candy?" Bien Rushua glanced at it and shook her head slightly. "Brother Hao, I've already grown up. You're only 14 and saying you're grown up? Then by 20, won't you be old?" Seeing that she didn't want candy, Li Hao continued to take her around. They came across a toy stall on the road and he bought her a metal frog. With a gentle press, it could keep hopping forward, a product under the command of the Qianji sect. The two of them strolled and chatted. Li Hao asked about her life on the mountain these years, and Bian Ruxue also asked about Li Hao's days in the courtyard. When it was time for dinner, Li Hao found a restaurant and they continued to talk while eating. After 8 years of not seeing each other, there was a lot to talk about. It started off a bit awkward, but later Li Hao seemed to find the feeling of his childhood again. When did you come down from the mountain? A month ago, said Bian Ruxue. Li Hao was surprised. Then why have you only just returned? I heard that some strange occurrences were happening somewhere, so I went to check it out. It turned out that the Mo River had seeped through, destroying an entire village, explained Bian Ruxue. Li Hao nodded. And what happened after that? I tried several times, but unfortunately, I could only destroy it. I couldn't get through. Li Hao smiled. Destroying it is still good, at least they can make it disappear for a while. Bian Ruxue sighed slightly and nodded. That's true. Li Hao noticed the sword that never left her side and asked, how has your swordsmanship improved over these years under the sword saint? Bian Ruxue was slightly stunned, then fell silent for a moment before saying, it's all right, I guess. Seeing her reaction, Li Hao couldn't help but laugh. What? Did you get criticized for not practicing well? Why else would you get so down when swords are mentioned? Bian Ruxue shook her head slightly, set the sword aside, and said, Brother Hao, let's not talk about swords. I only found out after returning that you're about to become the Li family's true dragon. Along the way, I heard that someone else wants to compete against you. Are you confident? What do you think? Li Hao asked. Seeing Li Hao so relaxed, Bian Ruxue immediately said, I think you are. I think so too. Li Hao smiled and served her some dishes. Speaking of which, I saw quite a few important figures heading towards Qingzhou on the road. I heard that the competition for the true dragon requires considering one's connections. Bian Ruxue said, Brother Hao, do you want me to call my master and the others down to support you? Connections are just a minor aspect. They don't count for much. The choice of the Li family's true dragon can't be influenced by outsiders, Li Hao said with a laugh. Bian Ruxue thought it made sense and said, all right then, if there's anything you need me to do, Brother Hao, you must tell me. There is actually something I need you to do. What? Bian Ruxue was startled. I'm full, you finish the rest. Don't waste food, Li Hao said with a content burp. Leaning back in his chair comfortably, Bian Ruxue was momentarily speechless. Chapter 123. In the following days, Li Hao stepped out of the Divine General Mansion, leisurely strolling through Qizhou City with Bian Ruxue. He took her to taste delicious foods, watch grand operas, and listen to storytelling. They also went to a nearby lake outside the city, where he caught dragonflies and butterflies for her and pressed them into a specimen book using the pages of a sword manual as a gift for her. Although both were no ordinary people doing these ordinary things, their faces were still filled with smiles. During their jaunt in the countryside, Li Hao brought paper, brushes, and rolls of canvas and painted numerous portraits for Bian Ruxue with varied backgrounds and perspectives totaling over 100 pieces, which almost exhausted his painting experience. But painting for her, Li Hao wasn't doing it for the experience on the outskirts of the city, not at the Blackwater Demon Lake where the second Master Li Muxio took Li Hao, but by the bank of another, smaller Demon Lake. Li Hao brought a fishing rod to fish while Bian Ruxue sat by his side, with the little white fox Xiao Rou lying in the girl's arms, playfully frolicking with her. When tired from playing, the girl would rest her cheeks on her small hands and quietly watch Li Hao fish. Seeing the young man gaze intently at the float, his serious demeanor was just like when he was a child, and it made her smile subtly. An image of that childhood courtyard seemed to appear before Bian Ruxue's eyes. In that courtyard, as she practiced swordsmanship, she would hear from a nearby pavilion the youthful, unweathered voice, Ah, Uncle Lin, you've placed it in the wrong spot again. The pieces aren't supposed to go inside the squares, they belong on the intersecting lines. You've lost again, Uncle Lin. Every time she grew tired from practicing swordplay, she would look up at the pavilion, and finding the boy there brought her peace. The cheerful laughter seemed like only yesterday, still resounding clearly in her ears at this moment. The young man's gaze was fixed on the lake's float, while the girl's gaze was fixed on the young man's profile, both seemingly lost in their thoughts. Suddenly, the float moved. The young man yanked the fishing rod fiercely, as if drawing a curved bow to its full extent, and quickly, a demon fish from the power passage realm was pulled ashore. For such demons below the soul succession realm, one could fish using rods and special lines made from tough metals. Brother Hao is amazing. The girl, regaining her senses, clapped her hands and cheered joyfully. Li Hao smiled. killed the demon fish with a snap of his fingers, tossing it aside, and seeing that it was getting dark, he reeled in his rod, pulling up a basket from the water containing several ordinary fish. He released them without much thought, after packing up his seat and stool used for fishing. He called over the little white fox and said to Bien Rushua, "Let's go home." "Okay," Bien Rushua nodded with a smile. Everything was carried by Li Hao, and with her hands behind her back, she walked with a lively skip. Following behind Li Hao, the mountainous smoke of evening cooking fires had just started, and the couple by the lake also headed home. Their steps back were not hurried. Passing by the fields and villages, they came across a field of melons. Only a single earth dog guarded the melon field, and Li Hao, with a smile, had Xiao Rou distract the dog while he stole a watermelon from another part. Holding the watermelon, he ran once a good distance away. He casually tossed down a couple of silver coins into the melon pit. At a distant hillside, Li Hao knocked open the large melon, and its bright red flesh was revealed. He handed half to the young girl. Li Hao had no such formalities. He simply buried his head and started munching away, juice spilling everywhere, but Bien Rushua was much more graceful and ladylike. With a light touch of her fingers on the hilt, the blade slid from the sheath, and, with a flash of silver light, the watermelon was cut into several crescent-shaped pieces. She handed a piece to Li Hao, and he started eating it as well. "Days like this are so comfortable," said Li Hao, sitting on the hillside, his palms pressed against the ground behind him, looking into the distance as the setting sun fell, its afterglow reaching the ends of the earth. Hearing Li Hao's words, Bien Rushua paused slightly in her melon eating, then smiled and said, "Yes, they are." Li Hao chuckled, finishing off his half of the melon while Bien Rushua shared hers with the little white fox. After they had all eaten, they went home together. Seeing that Li Hao and Bien Rushua had returned late, with mud on their trousers and bootlegs, Li Tiangang said to Li Hao, "Take Shuer to nicer places to play. Don't always go to those dirty, messy places, and this fishing rod you go fishing, but what about Shuer? Won't she get bored? You should consider more for others." Li Hao listened expressionlessly, seeming to smile for a moment. He nodded and murmured an acknowledgement before turning away. Bien Rushua hastily said to Li Tiangang, "Uncle, it was actually me who wanted to watch how fish. He's really good at it, and he likes fishing." I can tell Li Tiangang was very fond and affectionate towards this future daughter-in-law. His gaze softened as he said, "I know he likes it, but since you rarely come back, you can't always indulge him, always accompany him. If one day I'm not here, if you keep being so soft-hearted, you'll suffer." "Uncle, don't talk like that. You won't have anything wrong with you?" Bien Rushua hurriedly said. Li Tiangang smiled and replied, "Good girl, Shuer, don't worry about me. You should think more for yourself." Bien Rushua was momentarily stunned, then nodded. "I will." Another few days passed. Li Hao continued to accompany Bien Rushua around the city. As luck would have it, a temple fair was being held on the west side of the city, and they went there to enjoy themselves, watching fireworks resembling silver trees, street performers showing mortal skills, and shadow puppet plays. The temple fair was about to end, yet the pair still felt unsatisfied. Li Hao carried an armful of things they had bought and had not brought any trusted aides to wait on them so that he and Shuer could be at ease. "Are you happy?" Sitting on a stone by the roadside, shoulder to shoulder, watching the sunset beyond the city walls, Li Hao asked with a smile. Chapter 124. Happy. Bien Rux's eyes brimmed with laughter. Li Hao turned his head, gazing at her profile, and had to admit that traces of her childhood features were still there, only they had changed somewhat, ultimately because she had grown up and matured. And she had become even more beautiful and splendid, but as beautiful as brilliance is, it comes at a cost, like a meteor, so splendid, yet it vanishes in an instant, burning up its entire life. Li Hao watched quietly, and the two of them simply sat there in peaceful silence. A moment later, Li Hao said, "Do you want days like this to continue forever?" Bien Rushua was startled, turned her head, and looked at Li Hao. Their eyes met, and in each other's gaze, there lingered many unsaid things. Bien Rushua slowly turned her head back, a relaxed smile on her face, and said, "Of course, I do." "Really?" Li Hao asked, his eyes briefly flickering to the sword in her hand. Inseparable companions. Bien Rux's smile slightly faded, and at that moment she seemed to understand that Li Hao had noticed something. She couldn't help but sigh deeply in her heart. "Brother Hao, I might let you down." Bien Rushua turned her head, once again fixing her gaze on Li Hao, the easy smile gone from her face, replaced by lightly furrowed brows, a touch of sorrow and helplessness evident. Li Hao fell silent. The Flicker of hope in his heart slowly sinking with her words. Seeing Li Hao's silent, Bien Rukshu's floodgates of speech seemed to suddenly open. After a sigh, she lowered her head and spoke to herself. I know you've been so good to me, Brother Hao. There's no way I can repay your kindness to me, but I want to see for myself, to try for myself. I want to see the view from the pinnacle of swordsmanship to see if I can reach the summit. As the girl spoke of the sword, her somewhat subdued, soft voice contained an unwavering firmness. Li Hao's lips moved slightly, but he didn't speak. He just watched the girl bow her head silently. At this moment, beyond the familiar contours of her face, Li Hao also saw something else that was familiar. That was the gaze of countless geniuses rushing for glory, eyes that chased after their pursuit like moths to a flame. Actually, once you've seen that view, you'll realize that an ordinary life like what we have now is the happiest, Li Hao said softly, as if sighing. Was the joy of these past few days not enough to compete with that sword-obsessed heart? Bien Rushua looked up at the setting sun and said, maybe, but if I don't look, I fear I'll never be content. I want to see the ultimate in swordsmanship. I also want to see the ultimate sword technique that Master spoke of. The mighty power of the Sword of the Gods. Sword of the Gods? Li Hao shook his head and smiled. Countless swordsmen have existed in the world, and for many years there has been such a legend. There are myriad forms of swordsmanship, a plethora of schools and sword movements, which have evolved to extreme complexity, but these are not the zenith of swordsmanship. The ultimate in swordsmanship is known as the Sword of the Gods. No one knows the stance in which that sword is drawn, no one knows how that sword cleaves or thrusts, nor does anyone know if that sword truly exists, but it is widely believed that if one can comprehend such a sword, one can slay gods, sever spirits, vanquish demons, suppress devils, cut down all in this world, shatter sun and moon, and fill the seas. Such a sword is the ultimate pursuit, the ultimate goal of all swordsmen in the world. Li Hao, while at Listening Rain Tower, had read through many grandmasters' deeds, even those of past sword saints, and saw records showing that they sparred, fought, and exchanged views to comprehend the sword technique. Stories of the Sword of the Gods were most widespread and fervent 800 years ago, a time when sword cultivators were most obsessed and crazed. But later, the talk gradually died down, since to this day no one has understood it, and so, it became mere legend. After a topic has been talked about for hundreds of years, people will grow tired of it, and nobody is discussing or exploring it anymore. Unexpectedly, the girl before him actually harbored such a thought. Such a wish. Was it instilled by that wretched old man? Li Hao thought of the old man who had rebuffed him initially. He had felt neither fondness nor aversion toward him, but now, he felt a twinge of anger. Is this what your master taught you? Li Hao asked, noticing the slight emphasis in the young man's tone. Bien Rukshu's expression changed subtly. She glanced at Li Hao, then shook her head. No, Master just mentioned it in passing. It is what he pursues, but he never forced us. It's merely the path I want to seek for myself. Is that so? Li Hao's anger subsided, and he said, if you practice swordsmanship, I can accompany you. Moreover, I can teach you. Bien Rushue couldn't help but think of the days in the courtyard when they were younger. She sighed inwardly. Today was no longer like the past. The Sword of the Gods has no patterns, no records, it's just legend, impossible to teach. Maybe when someone truly wields that sword, then its form will become clear. Bien Rushua said softly. I know you also wield a sword, but this swordsmanship is a path. Even my master cannot teach it. Only by spending one's life to comprehend and explore might one glimpse a fraction of it. Li Hao was silent indeed. With a sword saint as her master, he needn't offer to teach her. He looked at the girl, locking eyes with her. Have you truly given your heart entirely to the sword? Swordsmanship can become an obsession, but there is still some distance between obsession and madness. Only those who truly love the sword could go so far. Bien Rushua met Li Hao's gaze without flinching, her heart unwilling to hide or run away when it came to the sword. Chapter 125. Yes, that's why I want to go and see. But what if you can't find it? That's why I want to try. Countless swordsmen have pursued it in vain. It's just a legend, unachievable. Are you willing to give up the happiness that's currently within your grasp for such an ethereal legend? Li Hao looked at the girl before him, somewhat unable to comprehend. He had mastered many arts, but never with such obsession. Bien Rushua fell silent for a moment before saying, if I don't try to climb once, I might regret it for the rest of my life. Li Hao couldn't help but smile and then let out a sigh. All the infatuated men and resentful women in the world, all the gratitude and grudges, aren't they all because of this unwillingness to let go? But after all, flowers may bloom again, but man will never return to his youth. Li Hao sighed and asked, What was your original plan? Bien Rushue, seeing Li Hao's continuous sighs, showed a trace of reluctance in her eyes, but still bit her lip and said, "In my sect, there are two choices. The mundane world and the path of the sword. Actually, it's possible to choose both and take care of both, but by doing so, it's still considered choosing the mundane world because the path of the sword is pure. It's singular. Only by being singular can one reach the pinnacle," she said, in a distant tone. After descending the mountain this time, I had already made my decision. I planned to come to accompany you first, and then continue to hone my swordsmanship. And in the future, her voice softened as she spoke. Her cheeks suddenly flushed a bit as she sneaked a glance at Li Hao, seeing that he was also looking at her. She quickly turned her head away. "And in the future, when brother Hao you wish to settle down and start a family, I will come back and marry you and bear children." When Li Hao heard this, all he felt inside was a deep sigh, because he knew that she hadn't finished speaking, and then he asked, "Then, I will continue to pursue my path of the sword," said Bien Rushue, her rosy cheeks gradually fading as she spoke earnestly. Li Hao understood her intentions and said, "But getting married and having children will delay a year of your time. In this way, it won't be true wholehearted dedication to the pinnacle." Bien Rushue nodded. She knew this all too well. If she truly wished to pursue the ultimate path, the best way would be to cut ties with Li Hao completely from then on. To be accompanied only by the sword, however, the childhood memories made it impossible for her to sever the connection. The debt of gratitude was too heavy, too large. She understood that without Li Hao's help back then, she might not even have the chance to pursue the path of the sword, nor would it have been possible to become an apprentice to the sword saint. The Li family provided her with the highest quality foundation establishment elixirs and the finest exotic blood to shape her sinews and bones. Li Hao even used the most extreme precious blood, derived from the 3,000-year-old demon corpse that Li Tiangang had slain at the border, for her blood melting. Only in this way was she shaped into a supreme 9th-grade talent. Only then did she have the opportunity to pursue that path of the sword. How could such a favor be forgotten? If forgotten, her heart would be incomplete, and so would her sword. How could she then ascend to the peak to become the ultimate swordsman? Therefore, even with such a deficiency, even with the delay of a year, she was willing. Giving birth to a child for Li Hao was her heart's desire, the only way she felt she could repay him. "Have you already decided?" Li Hao looked at her. "I have decided," Bien Rushue said seriously. Li Hao's mouth twitched slightly. Knowing that persuasion was futile, she had already given her whole heart to the sword. He couldn't help but sigh again, finding it a bit amusing in that courtyard. For years of being accompanied by wind and snow turned out to be less compelling than her 8 years with the sword. Indeed, perhaps in terms of time, he only had half. How could he compete with that? But he was alive, and the sword was not. He thought of that courtyard at night and the bright Milky Way in the dark night. He thought of the first time he saw the little girl crying, consoling her heart wounded by the loss of her father. He remembered the sunny day when two small hands made a pinky promise in the courtyard. "You must be obedient, just stay here. No matter where I go, I will always come back." Pinky promise, no changing. You said it. Whoever changes is a puppy. All right. All right. Who could have predicted that the child who casually placated with patronizing laughter that day was actually giving her true heart? Those letters sent from the Sword Cottage in the south were like ellipses after a vow, an ongoing story. Yet, in the courtyard, someone was still waiting for the spring breeze to come, and the girl far away, 9,000 miles distant, had already entrusted her heart to the sword. Li Hao had never expected that the little girl who departed with her master that day would truly go so far away. Perhaps he was too happy that day, mistaking that farewell for a promise. Li Hao also thought of that day years ago by the lake, fishing, when second master Li Muxiu, seeing the unparalleled natural talent of the youngster, couldn't restrain himself from imparting his unique peerless technique. "Half-step invincible fist," the old man asked after teaching. "Do you know why my fist technique is only called half-step?" The boy guessed. "Could it be that second master, you have only created half of it?" The old man laughed and shook his head. "The world's people all think so, but it's actually not the case. This half-step is the complete version." The boy asked, "Then why call it half-step?" The old man said, "Because only half-step can be invincible." The boy didn't understand. The old man continued, "Because people, if they take full steps, they tend to overdo it and cannot easily stop once the enemy dodges. They fall into a dilemma. Life is like this too. Don't be too serious, or else it's hard to rein in one's heart. Don't be too serious, or else it's hard to rein in one's heart." Only now did Li Hao savor the lesson. The half-step was about understanding. Not a literal half-step, the fist. is the same, so is life, otherwise one is bound to expose one's weakness. Li Hao looked up at the afterglow of the setting sun and finally let out a long sigh. Chapter 126. Bian Ruxue felt a slight tremor at the tip of her heart when she heard Li Hao's sigh. As if she sensed something had been lost, she gripped the sword in her hand a little tighter but then gently released it. Perhaps this was the outcome she had anticipated all along, so why should she feel sorrow or distress now? She collected her emotions and looked up at the youth in front of her, bright as stars and the gleaming moon, and asked with feigned ease, "When did you become aware of it?" Li Hao slowly withdrew his gaze, looking at the girl's cheeks that smiled like the evening glow, beautiful enough to bewitch, yet his eyes smiled without lingering, saying, "Perhaps from a long, long time ago." A long time ago. Bian Ruxue was taken aback and then looked at Li Hao with confusion. Why? Li Hao smiled without explanation. The contents of the letters behind, as well as the frequency of mailing them, were enough to illustrate a few things, for humans are emotive creatures and naturally keen on feelings. Including the fact that this time he descended from the mountain, he did not head directly to Li residence but first attempted to conquer Mo River. Once Mo River was infiltrated, the villages destroyed, civilians trapped in it were certain to die. Whether it was conquered sooner or later made no difference, it all depended on the mood at the time. This time you returned home, I took you everywhere in Qizhou. Were you truly happy? Li Hao asked. Bian Ruxue nodded slightly. Happy? That's good. Li Hao too nodded and then smiled, but there was something slightly lacking in that smile. She was truly happy, yet it still could not retrieve the heart that had already galloped away. Half step by half step. Why did she step a little too far? Li Hao shook his head and chuckled. What are you laughing at? Bian Ruxue inquired. Li Hao's gaze fell on the sunset glow, saying, I laugh because the scenery is beautiful, but alas, the world is bustling with people hurrying along the streets. Who has the leisure to stop and look up? Bian Ruxue fell silent for a moment. She knew Li Hao wasn't speaking about the passers-by, but her, so she spoke up for the passers-by. Maybe they are busy with life, busy with their dreams. The word dream, brother Hao, it was you who taught me that. Li Hao couldn't help but laugh heartily, suddenly standing up as if filled with boundless spirit. You're right. But then he added, however, if one really wants, they could manage the effort to look up for a moment. It all depends on whether they're willing, and what's the point of that? Of course, there's a point. Isn't the purpose of life just for that moment of looking up? It seemed both took the conversation seriously for a moment, then fell silent again. Time passed without knowing how long. Li Hao's face had now put away all emotions, looking slightly tired. I am a bit worn out from today's stroll. You should go back first. After a moment of silence, Bian Ruxue nodded lightly and stood up, saying, It's getting late. They'll be having dinner in the courtyard. You should come back soon so uncle doesn't wait too long. Li Hao's lips curled slightly. I've waited for him. For 14 years, what's a little longer for him to wait for me? Bian Ruxue looked startled, her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something but then realized she had nothing to say. A sudden, inexplicable pang of sadness struck the depth of her heart. This was something she never felt while practicing swordsmanship. When she trained with her sword, she was pure, but now she was not. Bian Ruxue left first, and Li Hao, with his arms full of snacks and trifles bought while wandering the temple fair, sat in place, looking at the items in his hands. Since the girl didn't take anything away, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself. If she truly liked them, wouldn't she have taken them with her? She only carried that sword, and with her own self, left like a whiff of breeze. Does the sword really hold that much allure? Li Hao looked up at the sky and mused. If he ever had the chance to reach the pinnacle of swordsmanship, he might climb up there and see for himself, to see just how many bones of swordsmen lie buried beneath that cliff and atop that ultimate peak. Whether there indeed exists that divine sword. The sunset too was stained red. Like a weeping blood orange peel, today's sun was about to set. Chapter 127. Li Hao returned with his arms full of food and drink. As he passed through the bustling district, the streets were already brightly lit. The streets were lively with pedestrians. Servants led tall horses, and the carriages behind them rumbled unremarkably along. All those leading horses possessed the power of the soul succession realm. Truly a bustling scene. Li Hao's lips curved into a slight smile. With the Li family approaching the true dragon era, Qinzhou City was already teeming with undercurrents. In recent days, he had seen many figures wearing clothes from other states flow into the city. While dining in restaurants, the conversations he overheard were all related, including discussions about some third-ranked official who had also come to Qizhou City to cheer on his nephew. To Li Hao's knowledge, his own mother didn't seem to have any clan relations. His grandmother had said that his mother was born into a small family, which was later wiped out by demons. She met his father, Li Tiangang, who helped her, and the two of them became acquainted and eventually tied the knot. These figures hurrying to Qizhe were obviously the doing of his second mother, who still hadn't given up all the better. Li Hao chuckled softly. Unconcerned, silently counting down the days and looking forward to the arrival of that day, passing by a lively riverbank and bridge, Li Hao saw some people playing chess and stopped to watch for a moment. Since it was already late to return, he was in no hurry. Don't push. Why is a kid squeezing in here? Most of those who had the leisure to play or watch chess were middle-aged or older, and aside from Li Hao, there were also two young men in their 30s. When he managed to squeeze his way to the front of the chessboard, he saw that the game had reached the middle, yet the outcome was already clear. Li Hao took a quick glance and knew that the player with the white pieces was doomed to lose. Although the white pieces formed a jiaolong shape, their head and tail were trapped, with no way to retreat, unless the white player had the daring to twist and turn aggressively, biting off an arm of the black pieces. There might have been a chance to win, but having been forced into such a checkmated position showed that the white player was already intimidated, and it was unlikely they possessed such audacity anymore. Li Hao shook his head slightly and looked at the player with the black pieces. The opponent was an old man with a ruddy complexion and white hair and beard, who was now smiling, gently shaking his folding fan and stirring up an evening breeze. He serenely waited for his opponent to admit defeat. I've lost. The player of the white pieces put his pieces back into their case, admitting defeat in front of Li Hao with resignation. Ah, what a pity. Tsk, there could have been hope in the move made earlier. Nonsense. It's clearly here that is. How come I feel like there's still a chance? Why concede? The crowd around the chessboard, who had been watching with furrowed brows, began to voice their opinions. Some lamented, some regretted the previous move for the losing player, and some didn't understand the resignation, feeling it was too hasty. The level of chess skill varied, and so did the perspectives on the situation, but the game was set and this chess match had ended. Amid the discussion, suddenly carriages appeared crossing the bridge. Seeing the throng of people at the bridge, the leading groomsman shouted angrily, "Move aside, all of you, move aside, stop blocking the way." His domineering attitude angered many, but upon seeing those jiaolong battle horses attached to the carriages, their expressions changed and they hurriedly made way, daring not to obstruct. Soon, the crowd parted, allowing the carriages through. Upon seeing the chess stall by the road, the groomsmen shouted, "Scram, scram." The onlookers who moved aside murmured among themselves. They commented that the groomsman, having been subservient in his master's household for so long, was now throwing his weight around unreasonably, out of indignation but powerless against greater force. The people around the chessboard hastily moved away, not daring to stay even though they were in the right. In the blink of an eye, the only ones left were Li Hao, the old black chess player, and also two young men in their 30s standing behind the old man. The black chess player continued to leisurely shake his folding fan, his gaze turned toward the evening breeze rustling the willows on the riverbank as if he hadn't heard the noise and commotion around him. The two young men behind the old player had a flash of murderous intent in their eyes. One of them turned his head and gave the incoming groomsman a chilly look. "What are you looking at?" The groomsman shouted angrily, noticing that the few people remaining had an extraordinary presence and seemed to have some background, but even so, he was rude without restraint compared to the backgrounds of those in Dayu, who could compare to his own master. "If you don't want your family to suffer, get out of here. Do you know who the lord sitting in the carriage behind me is?" One of the young men suddenly stepped forward, appearing in front of the groomsman with the speed of teleportation, and delivered a slap. The groomsman's head twisted to the side, his neck broken, and he died on the spot. The crowd, previously driven off, was shocked by the sight and cried out in alarm. Some muttered satisfaction, thinking the evil groomsman got his just deserts and felt avenged. Others felt that although the groomsman was odious, the punishment of death was too harsh, and they started to feel sympathy for him. But without giving the groomsman a second glance, the young man lifted the carriage curtain and stepped inside. Cries of alarm came from within the carriage, where a richly dressed, corpulent old man sat, seemingly unprepared for someone to burst in so abruptly. There were also women inside who began to cry out, wanting to scold, but the cold, stern gaze of the young man silenced them, turning their faces deathly pale as if the mere act of speaking would result in instant death at the hands of this warrior. "Apologize, kneel, and then scram," said the young man, totaling 8 words. The corpulent old man trembled with a mix of fear and rage, saying, "Do you know who I am?" "I'm acquainted with the king of Yin." "Your head may have someone above you," the young man coldly interrupted, "but above our master's head there is no one left. Say one more word and none of you will leave." A chilling murder intent filled the carriage, terrifying the women so much they wanted to cry but couldn't. Instead, cowering and trembling, the old man's face turned as unsightly as a pig's liver, and despite all the power at his command, he found himself in a hostile land. A commoner's wrath could cause blood to spatter within 5 steps, and there was no distinction between princes and commoners. Chapter 128. He could only grit his teeth, slap himself, and then kneel down, enduring the humiliation. Seeing this, the young man withdrew in 1 step, leaving the carriage, and casually slapped the haunch of the Jiaoblood warhorse. This horse was originally vicious and difficult to tame, but under the young man's slap, it reacted as if frightened, galloping off and causing pedestrians by the roadside to shout in alarm, but in the end, with no one to control it. The horse didn't run far before heading towards the river, seemingly in a panicked, indiscriminate rush, and crashed into the water, dragging the carriage along with it. A splash as it hit the water attracted many onlookers from a distance, yet the young man, as if he had done nothing, quietly returned to the old man's side, his expression calm, as if he had always been standing there without having moved at all. The elderly man seemed somewhat disheartened, his gaze returning from the river. He sighed, "What a pity for this river's autumn water." Saying so, he was about to stand up and leave, but as his gaze swept over, he saw a young man standing still by his side, who had picked up a chess piece from the chess case from beginning to end. Li Hao's gaze had not drifted towards the overbearing coachman or the carriage. In Qizhou City, he had no need to bow down to anyone, unless it was in that mansion. At this moment, he picked up the white pieces from the chess case, one after another. 3 He played with them as if amusing himself, placing these white pieces one by one in a certain position, forming lines and creating a momentum. The momentum became a dragon's claw, tearing a bloody gap in the original set of black pieces. His action wasn't intended to continue the game, for the outcome had already been determined, and this wasn't his game. It was simply that today, he simply didn't want to see such oppressive and dull things anymore. Thus, he sketched a stroke for it. The elderly man slightly raised his eyebrows, glanced at the move on the chessboard, and suddenly paused, seemingly taken aback. The 2 young men standing behind the elderly man, dressed in ordinary plain clothes, changed their facial expressions. The previously active young man seemed ready to act, to teach Li Hao a lesson, but was stopped by the folding fan the elderly man raised. "Young friend, do you also know chess?" The elderly man showed a smile, a little. Li Hao finished placing the chess pieces and felt somewhat relieved. "Seeing the position of your moves, they are indeed exquisite and show a young man's ardor. Not bad," praised the elderly man. "Youth has its own folly," Li Hao said indifferently. "Senior, please forgive me." The elderly man silently repeated Li Hao's words and couldn't help showing a smile. "Since you understand chess, why don't you sit down and have a game with me?" Li Hao looked at the chessboard and thought for a moment. "Okay." By now, the surrounding onlookers of the chess game had all left, leaving only the 4 of them under the weeping willows. Li Hao put aside the various snacks and toys he had been holding onto the grass and took his seat. The elderly man glanced at them and smiled inwardly, still a young boy at heart, but as Li Hao moved the items aside, revealing his embroidered clothes, the elderly man's eyes fell on the jade swinging at Li Hao's waist. His pupils narrowed slightly. The 2 young men behind him also noticed this young man might have some background. Based on his unusual performance, they also noticed the dragon blood jade at the young man's waist, and their pupils contracted. "Senior, please begin," Li Hao said. The elderly man snapped back to reality with a smile, not expecting the chance encounter would let him see that child from years past. He began the game with a smile. Soon, the pieces were put down in order, and Li Hao took white and played after. The onlookers who had retreated far away didn't dare to come close again, fearing trouble. Moreover, one of the youths behind the elderly man had just revealed a remarkable move, seemingly no ordinary individual, so they all kept their distance to avoid unnecessary trouble. More passers-by were attracted by the commotion of the horse and carriage falling into the water in the distance, with many throwing ropes to attempt a rescue. Meanwhile, on Li Hao's side, the black and white pieces on the chessboard were already clashing fiercely. With the initial layout over, the game moved into a series of aggressive attacks. Li Hao's moves were merciless, all killing blows, even more ferocious and fierce than usual. The elderly man was playing slower and slower. The folding fan that had been lightly swaying at first was now put away without notice. Each move was made with furrowed brows and careful consideration, but the young man was precise and ruthless with an aggressive and overwhelming momentum. The elderly man's expression grew more solemn, his full attention on the game. The 2 young men behind him also showed a change in their expressions, glancing at the young man. A moment later, The winner on the chessboard was clear. The elderly man's face darkened, obviously not expecting to lose, especially so disastrously. He had not lost in many years. The two young men behind him showed anger in their eyes, staring coldly at the young man. It seemed as if they would strike in an instant, ready to take out the young man as soon as the elderly man gave the sign. Li Hao seemed aware and glanced up but wasn't concerned. If they truly started a fight, he was not afraid. The elderly man stared at the chessboard for a long time, then spoke slowly. Let's play another round. Li Hao, having withdrawn, said indifferently, even if we play again, you will lose. The elderly man was slightly taken aback. For no one had ever dared to speak to him with such disregard, but seeing that the young man hadn't intended to be disrespectful, he took a deep breath, calming the anger in his heart, and said, let's play another round, and if you win again, I will give you a small gift. I lack nothing, replied Li Hao, but after saying so, he chuckled. The elderly man smiled and said, you will definitely like what I am offering. That's not a certainty, Li Hao replied indifferently. Moreover, if I win again, I worry that your attendants may feel compelled to intervene. The two young men's faces changed slightly, their eyes coldly fixating on Li Hao. However, the elderly man waved his fan and said with a smile to Li Hao, they are ignorant, don't mind them. If they have displeased you, I apologize on their behalf. Chapter 129. Hearing these words, the complexions of the two youths changed, revealing shock in their eyes. The old master actually apologized? Even though they could only see his back, under that kind voice, they felt an aura of majesty emanating, and both were keen-edged in their gaze, not daring to show any more killing intent. Li Hao was surprised and looked at the old master. Seeing his eyes sincere and gentle, indeed heartfelt, fine then, Li Hao agreed, thinking that the fight just now was indeed a bit too fierce. It wasn't worth venting that anger on the other party. Soon, the second game of chess began. This time, Li Hao's moves were much gentler, with give and take from both sides. The elder playing the black pieces also wasn't as tense as before, even engaging in idle chatter while playing. Tell me, at such a young age, why do you immerse yourself in chess Tao instead of joining the military on the frontier, or training hard in martial arts to seek fame and fortune? Fame and wealth are but dust, glory and riches are also clouds. Li Hao played a piece casually, saying, the ultimate goal of life is nothing more than to have enough to eat and wear. It seems I was lucky to be born with no worries about food and clothing. So why bother with the effort? No ambition. A youth standing behind the elder playing the black pieces couldn't help but snort coldly. Li Hao glanced up and said, you think you're ambitious just by being a bodyguard? The elder was surprised and looked at Li Hao. This didn't sound like the words of a young man, but rather like the mindset of an old man who had washed away the superficiality of life and experienced the vicissitudes of the world but just a moment ago. The young man was still able to express the wild pride of youth. The youth should carry the ambition to soar above the clouds, one day sweeping across 19 provinces. The elder playing the black pieces said with interest, don't you wish to see the view from the mountain peak? What's there to see? It's just the human world, Li Hao said off-handedly. Some people's journeys are the starry seas, whereas I only wish for poetry, wine, and pastoral life. Everyone has their own aspirations. The elder was taken aback. Even pausing with his move, he looked intently at the young man, and his sealed heart seemed to feel a sense of release. Yet the youth behind the elder scoffed, you've never even been to the mountain peak, how would you know what the view is like up there, yet you dare make such bold claims? Li Hao frowned slightly, glanced at him, but didn't respond. Realizing what was happening, the elder's face turned stern and he said, Hua, apologize to the young master. What? The youth, as if he hadn't heard clearly, looked at the elder in disbelief, shocked. The old man is actually making me apologize? What is my status? My apologies, how many can bear them, and how many would dare to accept them? Fa old master, I am? The elder playing the black pieces turned his head slightly to look at him. His gaze was as calm as the frost after heavy snowfall, yet it made the youth break out in a cold sweat in an instant. His complexion changed dramatically, sweat beading on his forehead as he quickly bent over, bowing to Li Hao. Young master, I was presumptuous and misspoke. Please forgive me. Let it be. Li Hao waved it off. The elder playing the black pieces smiled slightly, then continued to play and chat, move by move, from fame to those who stir up the world. The elder asked the young man if he ever aspired to be one of them. The young man then asked, are they still alive? The elder thought about it and couldn't help but laugh in silence. The second game ended well. Li Hao won again. But this time he was much gentler in his approach, more pulling and tugging. It was indeed a match with both sides engaged. Li Hao felt that this old master's chess skills were slightly better than fifth master's, but compared to his own, there was still a gap. It's getting late, old master, till fate allows us to meet again. Li Hao stood up, picked up the meager prizes of jugglery and food that altogether didn't amount to more than a few ounces of silver, smiled at the old master and waved goodbye, then turned and left. "I haven't given you your gift yet." The elder playing the black pieces promptly said, "No need." The young man didn't look back, just waved his hand behind him. "As I said, I lack nothing." The elder was taken aback and laughed to himself, murmuring, "In this world, who truly lacks nothing humph, this is the renowned third generation of the Li family in Qingzhou. His cultivation level is indeed formidable. I can't even see through it," but a bit foolish watching the young man's retreating figure. The youth who had apologized earlier had a sullen look and scornfully said, "That young man probably doesn't realize what a great opportunity he's just forsaken. Does he? Ridiculous." Hearing his words, the elder playing the black pieces glanced at him indifferently and said nothing instead. He looked toward the street from which the young man had departed and sighed silently. "If only this child were my son, how wonderful would that be?" But that was just a passing thought. He shook his head, smiled, and said, "This child's talent probably exceeds your imaginations. Only 14 years old and his skill in chess is already master level. Even if born with a natural affinity for chess Tao, it still requires some research in 14 years to study chess Tao to this level and also cultivate to the 15th realm. That's quite terrifying." The two youths, upon hearing this, fell silent. They couldn't refute it, it was indeed so. 14th realm at 14 years of age. A talent they themselves couldn't even hope to match. Your being too modest. His chess skills are only showcased on this small board, whereas your pieces, old master, are placed across this world. Another youth, with a slightly scholarly air, said smilingly. The elder chuckled upon hearing this. Although it was flattery, it couldn't prevent him from bursting into laughter, feeling that the frustration of losing 2 games in a row seemed much more bearable now. "Haha. Indeed. However, if I meet this young man again, I must win back on the chessboard as well." He was not one to accept defeat easily. Having said that, he laughed heartily as he walked away towards the city gate. "Old master, we've just arrived, and the real show hasn't even started yet. Don't you want to watch?" "I've already watched it. Very good, very good." Chapter 130. The time in the small courtyard quietly slipped away, since Li Hao and Bien Rushue returned from the temple fair that day. Neither of them had gone out again, both quietly waiting for that day to arrive. On ordinary days, Bien Rushue practiced her swordsmanship in the courtyard, focusing only on her sword intent, and not her sword moves. Otherwise, the formidable might of her sword moves would likely sever the last hints of autumn in the courtyard. After finishing her sword dance, the girl turned her gaze back to the pavilion. But the pavilion was now empty, no longer housing the figure of the boy from before. In the girl's clear eyes, as pure as the first snow, an involuntary shade of sadness and despondency appeared, but only for a moment before she gathered herself and delved back into the cultivation of her sword intent. Meanwhile, in the Li family ancestral hall, Li Hao's figure appeared from time to time. He would find fifth master for a game of chess, or head to the listening rain tower to randomly pick up a book and sit reading for an entire day. As the 2-month deadline drew near, only the last 10 days remained. On this day, Li Hao took out his sketchpad from his room by the pond, which he hadn't touched for half a month, planning to capture the final fallen leaves of late autumn. A figure ran into the courtyard. It was Li Yuanzhao. Gasping for breath, he said to Li Hao, "How? Qianqian is looking for you." "Qianqian? It's Ren Qianqian, the one we went to Cangyu City with before," Li Yuanzhao quickly added. Recalling the matter, Li Hao asked, "What does she want with me?" "She said her father agreed, and she wants to learn swordsmanship from you," Li Yuanzhao immediately replied. Li Hao was slightly surprised to remember this. "How? Do you agree? If you do, I'll go and call her over," Li Yuanzhao asked, as he was only sent to relay the message. After some thought, Li Hao said, "All right. Since she was so insistent, it wouldn't be good for him to refuse any longer." "Okay." Li Yuanzhao grinned, saying, "She's just outside the mansion. I'll go bring her in now." Li Hao nodded. By the time he finished his painting with ink, Li Yuanzhao had led the slender and beautiful Ren Qianqian over. The girl, holding a sword in her arms, didn't glance around. Excessively, she simply turned her gaze from side to side subtly, scrutinizing the divine general mansion that so many people envied and aspired to. Even as a grandmaster's daughter, well-traveled and knowledgeable, upon arriving here, Ren Qianqian couldn't help but reveal a hint of nervousness on her cheeks. From the entrance of the divine general mansion to the mountain and river courtyard was not a short distance. Along the way, there were elite guards with a natural air of solemnity. Stationed at regular intervals, and patrolling guards occasionally passed by. To say it was a mansion was an understatement. It was akin to a slightly smaller palace. On her journey here, Ren Qianqian had already seen several figures with a presence similar to her father's, and some even more profound and restrained than his. However, they lacked that detachment from worldly affairs and elegance, instead possessing a more reserved and deadly aura reminiscent of blood sea. This revelation startled her internally. These figures, who had transcended worldly bounds and could be called grandmasters, seemed to be mere guards within the divine general mansion. How? Qianqian is here, Li Yuanzhao called out with a smile by the pond. There was only Li Hao sitting alone. Ren Qianqian looked at this genius youth whose fame had spread like thunder through Qingzhou City in recent days, her eyes lighting up with admiration. Since the battle in Sangyu City, she had predicted that his renown would sweep through Qingzhou City, yet she didn't anticipate the fervor with which it actually happened at this moment. She saw Li Hao clad in a white robe, exuding a natural aura of elegance, holding a brush. Having just paused from his sketching, Ren Qianqian was surprised and taken aback, having thought that a talent like Li Hao would be relentlessly cultivating at every moment. Yet here he was, relaxed as ever. "I've thought it through," she said. Ren Qianqian collected her thoughts and straightened her posture a bit more, declaring, "I want to learn swordsmanship from you, the strongest swordsmanship of the Li family. I am willing to serve at your command for life." The corners of Li Hao's mouth twitched slightly. He, too, was before a child willing to give up everything for the sake of the sword. He let out a faint sigh in his heart and set his brush down on the edge of the inkstone. Then he turned in his chair to face the girl and asked seriously, "Have you really thought this through?" "I've thought it through." Ren Qianqian's eyes were solemn and resolute. "Your father agrees?" "He has consented," she replied. "Really?" Ren Qianqian nodded, clutching the sword tightly. "I want to transcend the Grandmaster, to achieve immortality with my sword." Li Hao gave a faint smile and said, "What is immortality?" "After all, even a Grandmaster is not free from the mortal coil, and immortality is not truly eternal. Once today is over, you will be a person of the Li family. You will never be able to leave, not even if you abandon your martial skills. Because as long as you remember, you will not be allowed to go unless you die." As he spoke, his eyes suddenly became sharp as blades, piercing into the girl. "Can you really do it?" Ren Qianqian's heart trembled slightly as she instinctively wanted to step back in the face of Li Hao's intense gaze. The pressure was too overwhelming to bear, but as her heels started to lift, she stopped herself. If she couldn't even withstand the gaze of a peer her age, how could she talk of mastering the sword or achieving immortality with it? She took a deep breath, held her sword tighter, and gritted her teeth. I can do it." Li Hao looked deeply into her eyes, then withdrew his gaze and said indifferently, "Fine, from today onward you are my sword attendant, bearer of my sword." Ren Qianqian's heart shook slightly and she immediately nodded. "Thank you." "No need for thanks, it is simply an exchange of efforts," Li Hao said. "Later, I will take you to meet Zhao and you will sign a servitude contract with him. You'll also familiarize yourself with the environment and rules of the divine general mansion.